We had our first picnic yesterday in some time. We actually, I think, had one a few years ago, but it's the first one in quite some time. And you know, we really had to struggle to make it happen. You know, we got rained out twice. I mean, usually you set one rain date, but, you know, we tried to have this thing back in June. Didn't happen in June, so then we tried, last week? And it looked like it was going to rain, and then we had to postpone it. But yesterday was glorious. So it was perfect. It was like the perfect temperature. And, you know, it was supposed to be from 12 to 4, and by 5, everybody was just hanging out, and by 6, everybody was just hanging out. It was just one of those days where you just felt like just hanging out with the kids and everything. I discovered some athletic prowess among these members of this congregation that I was really surprised by. We got some serious ball players in this church. So it was a good time. Miss Juliet, chief among them. I'm going to post, I need to post on Facebook some pictures of Miss Juliet serving. Because, I mean, I know you've played this game before, haven't you? You've played some serious volleyball in your time. She had that ball and boom! It was serious, so it was cool. But it's great to just experience fellowship, community, you know, to be in community, to be with one another, to take time to just be, to hang out, to just listen to one another, to just talk, to play with the kids. And it reminds us that we're really created for love. We're created for compassion. We're created to be together, to get to know one another. You know, we get so caught up in the achievements that we think we need to make or the things we need to do, and not that any of those are not important. But it's good to be reminded from time to time that we are created for love, to care for one another, to get to know one another. So our third way of love this morning in this 7-week series is the way of caring. And we're looking at the story of the Good Samaritan, where Jesus simply gives us an example of what love looks like. And there are 3 different people that engage someone in need, someone by the side of the road, somebody we don't know how bad they are, but they can't be too good because they're not getting up. And 2 people walk by, and it's hard for us to imagine that 2 people would just walk by, but how often do we walk by? You know, there's so many situations we encounter where it could be a student in a hallway of a school where we're working, just sitting there with their hands, their head on their hands, on their knees, or it could be a loved one that's in the hospital and we just can't, you know, find time to get out there to visit them, or it could be a stranger on the side of the road that's just shaking a cup, saying that they're hungry. There's so many situations that we encounter in our daily lives. And I want to look at this story in terms of 3 responses to a human being in need. First of all, the response of aloofness, where we walk on the other side of the road. The priest, the Levite, they walk by on the other side of the road. And there could be a lot behind aloofness. You know, there could be busyness, anxiety, just don't have time, whatever. We got more important things to do. And then there's the response of fear. And these 2 people, when they came upon this man in the road, had reason to fear. It was a dangerous road. The guy had just been robbed. The robbers might be in the bushes. You know, there are reasons that we don't want to get involved in certain things. They remind us of things from our past or situations where we just don't want to go. And then the third response is the one of engagement. This Samaritan man engaged the situation. And when you engage, you don't know what you're going to encounter. You don't know how long you're going to be there. You don't know what it's going to cost. You don't even know whether the person that you're helping is even going to appreciate what you do. There's so many unknowns. And yet, something compelling overcomes the aloofness, the anxiety, the afraidness, whatever it is, something in us which is called compassion. The natural human response to another human being, this innate, created, primal instinct that we have to be with one another, to care for one another, to walk with one another, to make a difference in one another's lives. So I want to look at each of these responses, and I think all of us have experienced all of them. All of us have at times been aloof, all of us at times have been afraid, and all of us at times have engaged. But just to really look at these dynamics and to pray about, to meditate on what it is that God is calling us to do and be. So first of all, the response of aloofness. A priest was walking down a road, and he saw a man on the other side of the road who was in obvious need, and he got on the other side of the road and kept on walking. How aloof, how arrogant, how indifferent. How can you walk by someone in need like that? A priest of all things. Probably had important places to go. Probably had to say Mass at 5 o'clock and didn't have time to get, all dirty and messy. Didn't know what the situation. I mean, if you got an important mission, you got somewhere to go, something you got to do, you encounter someone in need, it could just be seen as a distraction. You have to constantly prioritize what's most important for me to be engaged in at this particular time. And maybe that's just not it. Walked on the other side of the road. I want to suggest that one of the causes of aloofness in our lives is compassion fatigue. That we're just overloaded. If I hear one more person get on the subway and say, why do they all speak, why do they use the exact same words? What's up with that? Excuse me, what is it? Pardon the interruption. You all know it. You've heard it before. My name is so-and-so. My situation is so-and-so. There's this, and you hear it enough times and you don't trust it. You're not sure if it's for real. Who is this person? I don't have a relationship with them. And I don't know that, I think there's a particularity in our time with the social media age that we are now exposed to every tragedy that happens anywhere in the world at any given moment. You can turn on the TV or you can turn on social media at any given moment and you can find the police beating up some teenager for jaywalking. You can find the police arresting some kid for making a clock and bringing it to school. You can find, you can find a 3-year-old boy washed up on the shore, on the beach. A Syrian refugee. How many of those videos can you watch and not be completely overwhelmed, completely filled with anger and despair, and get to a place where you feel helpless, you feel paralyzed to take action? I want to think a little bit about this Syrian refugee crisis in particular, because this is one that we've been hearing about and it's so overwhelming. That picture of that 3-year-old boy on the beach was kind of an image that you just can't get out of your mind. And then you hear the story of that 3-year-old boy. His Aunt Tima lives in Vancouver, Canada, and she was petitioning for the family to come. Her brother Abdullah is the father of that 3-year-old boy. And she had been petitioning the authorities in Canada to allow the family to come live with her. She had enlisted her member of parliament. They had written to the Canadian immigration authorities. She had been fundraising in her neighborhood. She had raised money. She was raising enough money for the travel for her family to come and to get an apartment for them to rent. But because of various bureaucratic issues, Abdullah was not qualified to come to Canada. He didn't have certain paperwork in place, and they denied the request, even though there was a community effort in place to provide for the person's needs. So with no other option, Abdullah and his 2 sons and his wife, together with about 20 other refugees, leave Turkey in a boat that's overcrowded, overloaded, to try to get to Greece where they can try to get into the European Union. Well, they get out a little ways, and the waves are too much for this little boat. The boat is overcrowded. It capsizes. All 23 passengers are in the sea. And Abdullah has one of his sons in one arm and one of his sons in the other arm. They're 2 and 3 years old. And he's trying desperately to keep his own head above water and to keep their heads above water. And I don't know if you've ever been in water before, but you can't tread water and hold, even if they're little, even if the kids are tiny, you just can't lift them up. And as try as he might, he could not get their heads up above the water so that they could breathe. And both of those boys died in his arms in the water while he was desperately trying to keep them alive. And he finally just had to let them go, and he turned around, and then he found that his wife had also died right next to him. She had also drowned. And he made it to the sea, to the shore, but he's absolutely broken. Now, when we hear so often we just hear the big picture. There's this Syrian refugee crisis, and it's hard to move us because it's just so overwhelming and so big. But when you hear the human story, when you actually begin to sense what was it like to be a father in the water, trying beyond any measure to to keep your children alive and not be able to do it. Can you imagine that experience? So how do we respond to the tragedy of these human realities? What's even going on in Syria? Why is it even like this? This war has been going on for 4 years. There's like 200,000 people have been killed. There's 4 million people have left that country, are trying to find somewhere that they can be housed. And I think it gets beyond for us. It gets beyond aloofness. Aloofness is too cold a term to describe what we're actually dealing with here. I think it's more a situation of not knowing what we can do. Paralysis. One of the things I think is important to get in for us is that as members of the United Methodist Church, we are part of an international body that is actually responding to the Syrian refugee crisis. The United Methodist Church, which we are a part of, and I think sometimes we have to think of ourselves not just as individuals in one particular place, but we have to understand who we're a part of and what we're a part of. And we have responses. We have an advanced project that is providing school supplies for Syrian children who are in refugee camps so they can continue to get their schooling. We have programs that are trying to get refugee kids settled. We have programs where you can go overseas and get connected with, there's a lot of different ways, but we can, as a body, as an international body, can make an impact on things that we couldn't otherwise make an impact. So there are ways to get past aloofness. I think the fear sometimes is worse. Even with this Syrian refugee crisis has been laced with fear. There's a lot on a certain political spectrum that are talking about that this is a fake refugee crisis, that really these are just a way to get the hordes, Muslim hordes into Europe, that ISIS is actually hiding out within the refugees. You see this stuff all over the place. That actually ISIS is this is the way they're trying to get onto the continent of Europe. This is the way they're trying to get onto the continent of America. And Jesus deals directly with this kind of fear, this kind of xenophobia, by making the person who cares a Samaritan. If he was telling the story today, he would be telling it about a Muslim. If he was talking to American Christians, the Good Samaritan would be the good Muslim. All the things that Christians stir up about Muslims are things that Jews stirred up about Samaritans at that time. That somehow their religion is not up to ours. That somehow there's something in their religion that's not quite right. Or, there's this centuries of animosity, all that kind of stuff. Jesus is saying, this person who happened to be a Samaritan, this person who happened to be a Muslim makes a clock, takes it to school. They shut down the school because they think it's a bomb. You know, a white Christian kid makes a nuclear reactor and Homeland Security wants to get a hold of him and figure out how they can help him. But a Muslim kid makes a clock and they shut down the school. Now, they didn't evacuate anybody, so they didn't think it was really a bomb. If they thought it was a bomb, they would have evacuated the school. But they want to humiliate the kid. Well, thank God he's got an invitation to the White House now. He's got an invitation to MIT. He's got an invitation from, I don't know who all, what technology. But you know, we need to get over some of this stuff. And Jesus explicitly addresses the kinds of prejudices and stereotypes that come up for us out of nothing but fear that separate us from one another. A Samaritan person who went over to the other side of the road and turned the person over and put him on the donkey and took him to the inn and paid to have them, you know, to get the rest and the recuperation. That's a human reality. All the things that divide us, the boundaries that divide us, have nothing to do with the overwhelming power of compassion which God has created us with to care for one another. But there are many other reasons that we fear getting involved in situations. Many of us fear getting, you know, if you've been in a traffic accident before and you see a traffic accident on the side of the road and maybe it stirs up some stuff for you and it's hard for you you haven't dealt with the trauma of what you've experienced and it's hard to encounter that. A lot of us have a hard time visiting people in the hospital because the whole trauma of illness and being in the hospital is just hard for us to face. When my sister died, my dad's best friend came to visit him in the funeral home, but he could not come in. He stayed outside. He just couldn't. He was out there just bawling his eyes out. My dad went out and comforted him because the trauma of even being there with my dad was too much. I have had the experience recently of interacting with one of our dear members here, Isabel, who is now in hospice. And it's very hard to be with someone you care for who is wasting away, who is not much older than you are, who you have known as a vibrant, exciting, powerful, engaging person. And now to see them, they can't even open their eyes. They can't, you know, I mean, she has good days and bad days. And the other day, you know, we get these kind of things in us that we feel like somehow we have to fix the situation. And if we can't fix the situation, we don't want to be in the situation. It's so hard to be in a situation. A lot of times people are just looking for us to be with them, but we feel like we have to do something, you know, we have to fix something. And, you know, I was just like, somehow I got it in my head that I had to find some kind of way to like bring peace. You know, and we were talking about peace and it just didn't feel like we were going anywhere, and you know, there was anxiety in her eyes, and you know, I finally just said, you know, I love you. And she had this big smile on her face. You know, sometimes that's all you can do is just love somebody. You may not be able to fix it, you may not be able to do, but it makes such a difference. We are wired to care about each other, and we're wired to be cared for. And if you've ever been in a situation that is really troubling and fear-provoking, and someone has come to be with you, you remember it for the rest of your life. I mean, when our family was in the hospital, I had this strange pastor I'd never met before came to visit me, and I just wanted to talk to the guy all day. I was so appreciative of him coming. There was this woman that used to drive my daughter to school. You know, I didn't know her that well. But in our situation, my foot was broken. I couldn't drive. My daughter wasn't allowed to take public transportation. She had to be driven to school. So this woman for like 2 or 3 weeks drove us all the way from Brooklyn all the way to Manhattan every day and drove us back. She didn't have time to do that. She already had a busy life. Isn't that a lot of the times that we just don't have time to reach out to someone? But that's because we don't realize how important it is. I will remember Beulah Sears for the rest of my life. Every time I ever see her, I will give her thanks. I will, because she, when the moment I needed somebody, she stepped up and she made the effort. She laid aside whatever else she had to do, and she did what it took to get me through a certain situation. You're never going to forget that. So we engage. The Samaritan man engaged with this person on the side of the road. And it's a risk to engage because you don't know what you're into. As soon as you engage, you do not know where it's going to go. You do not know how well it's going to go. You do not know what it's going to cost. You don't know whether it's going to turn out right. We take a huge risk to actually engage with somebody. To call somebody up on the phone that you have given up on. To engage with someone where you're just not really sure where that relationship stands. But somehow there's this compassion that compels you to reach out and to connect. When we do that, we're actually connecting also with God. The love that we have to share with one another is not limited because the love comes from God. When we get caught up in this, I give you a little love, so you give me a little love, and I gave you 2 grams of love, and I only got 1.5 grams of love back from you. I did this for you, and you didn't do that for me. You know, when we get into that, it is never going to add up. But what Jesus is talking to us about, he talks first about God. When the lawyer comes to him and he says, what is the greatest commandment of all? Jesus first of all talks about the love of God. Because the love of God is connected with our love for one another. And he talks about love God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and all your strength. Give everything. Open yourself completely to the abundant love of God. Allow the love of God to heal you. A lot of us don't want to receive the love of God. We don't want to receive it because we're ashamed. We don't think we deserve it. Or we're not sure what strings are attached. We're not sure what we're going to have to do if we receive the love of God. But the beginning, the foundation for all compassion is allowing the love of God, our Creator, the Creator of heaven and earth, the Creator of things much greater than the little things that keep us from doing the things that could fill us with love. The Creator, God of love, receiving that love with all our mind, all our heart, all our soul, and all our strength, equips us to love one another. What does it mean if I love you with 2 grams and you're only able to give me 0.2 grams back, but I get 0.8 grams back from somebody else, and then out of the blue somebody gives me 2 grams, and then what if it doesn't have to be 1-to-1? What if I don't have to get the exact amount from you that you give to me? What if it doesn't have to be an equation? What if in the grand scheme of love that we were freed up to just love one another out of all the love that God pours into our hearts? And we didn't even have to keep score. Didn't even have to keep track. That just whenever we had the opportunity to engage with someone, friend or stranger or whatever, and we were just, you know, if the situation permitted, we just engaged it with compassion and just opened ourselves then to whatever love might come back to us from whatever source at whatever time. The lawyer asked, what is the greatest commandment of all? Jesus said, you already know. Why don't you tell me? And the lawyer said, to love God with all our mind, heart, soul, and strength, and to love our neighbors as ourselves. And then he said, who is my neighbor? And Jesus said, whoever cares for another person is acting as neighbor. And then he invites him, and he invites all of us to go and do likewise. Amen.